Settle in now. Let your body sink deep into stillness, like soft soil after rain. The day is done, and there's no need to carry anything with you into this night. Not the thoughts, not the worries, not even your name. Just let go, breath by breath, until the only thing left is this moment, this quiet, this story, a story that rises, gently like a hawk on the morning wind, unfolding not with noise or urgency, but with the calm rhythm of wings against the sky. Our tale begins high above a sleeping land, where valleys curl like gentle arms round fields of wheat, and fog rolls low over rivers that gleam beneath starlight. In this vast and quiet country, perched upon a hill brushed with thyme and stonecrop, stands an old castle. Its towers are worn, its walls softened by ivy and time, and its name once spoken in court, and carved into banners, has long since faded from the tongues of kings. The people who live in the valley now call it simply the Perch, because at the very top of the highest tower, open to the sky on all sides, lives a falconer named Cadric, not a lord, not a soldier, not a keeper of wealth or land, but a man of silence and breath, who lives alone in his circular room of stone and timber, accompanied only by the wind, a cot of straw and wool, and a peregrine falcon named Lyra. Cadric sleeps now, cold beneath his blanket, one arm draped softly over his chest, the other stretched toward the base of Lyra's perch, not to grasp, not to hold, but simply to rest nearby, as if his body remembers what words never say, that trust, real trust, requires no touch, and beside him, Lyra rests as well, talons tucked, feathers ruffling slightly with each slow, steady breath. Her eyes are closed, but she is not unaware. Falcons do not sleep like we do, they drift, alert even in dreams, hearts beating fast and full. Even as the world dims round them, the tower is open to the wind, its three arched windows letting in the breath of night, carrying the scent of pine, of damp soil far below, of distant smoke from the village fires. Nothing stirs within the tower except the sound of Cadric-esque breathing and the occasional soft tap of Lyra-esque claws adjusting on the wood. The stars above pour their silver across the stone, and in this quiet, something deeper begins to unfold, not action, but memory. Not memory as a story told, but as something felt, known, carried. And so we drift now, into the soft dream of a falconer, not of adventure or conquest, but of sky and wind, and time stretched across feathers and eyes and unspoken bonds. Cadric was not always here, high above the world. Once, long ago, he lived in the belly of the castle, the low quarters where light barely reached, and the smell of hay and horse was thick as wool. His father worked the stables. His mother mended saddles and fed the dogs, and Cadric, even as a child, moved more like a shadow than a boy, quiet, listening, hands always busy, but eyes always lifted. The other children played, chased, shouted, but he would climb the stone steps that wound along the outside of the keep and sit for hours on the ledge, watching the sky. He knew every bird that passed, the pale kestrel with wings like parchment, the wide-bellied buzzard that circled at noon, and once a moment he would never forget the silver flash of a gerfalcon, diving, so fast it seemed to vanish before the mind could name it. It was not long after that when the old falconer noticed him, Master Thorn, a man with knotted hands and a face like crackbuck, called Cadric down from the stone ledge and asked, "What do you see when you look up there?" And Cadric had answered, after a long silence, "Freedom that always comes back." Thorn had said nothing, just nodded, and from that day on, the boy was allowed into the mews, not to clean or feed, but to observe. to learn falconry. Kedrick discovered was not about power or ownership. It was not a matter of force, but of partnership. The bird must want to return, and so it became a meditation, patience woven in it. Ritual leather gloves, meat carefully sliced, bells tied to jesses. Hoods placed gently over sharp ice until the falcon was ready to fly, and fly they did merlins. Kestrels hooks, each with their own mind, their own rhythm, their own way of saying yes or no. Kedrick never rushed, never flinched, and in time, even the most stubborn birds began to choose him. The castle changed, as all castles do. Lords rose and fell. Wars came and went. And the falconry grounds grew quieter, until finally, when Thorn passed quietly in his sleep, Kedrick was the only one left, the last falconer, and so he climbed to the top of the tower and made it his own, not in title, but in trust. He brought the perches, the hoods, the tools, and one by one, the birds returned to him, not to serve, but to be. And then came Lyra. It was winter, sharp and white. When a rider from a nearby village brought word of a wild falcon caught in a net by the river, Kedrick had ridden down in the grey light of dawn, his cloak wrapped tight, leather gloves on, and when he found her, she was rage and panic bound into feathers, her wing torn, her eyes flashing, her breath fast and furious. He had said nothing, only crouched near her, gloved hand open, and waited. She did not attack, but neither did she trust. It took 3 days before she let him touch her, and weeks before she would take food from his hand. But Kedrick knew the pace of patience, and he gave it freely. When she flew again, months later, the sky seemed wider, as if the world itself had held its breath for her return. She came back, not on command, but in her own time, and that, to Kedrick, was everything. Since then, they had lived together in the tower morning flights, quiet meals, long evenings watching storms roll in from the mountains, and always the silence between them full, steady, sacred. Tonight, as they sleep, that silence is deeper than usual, not heavy, just still. Kedrick dreams again not of castles or names, but of wind moving over feathers, of clouds drifting beneath him, of the world seen from above, where every noise becomes small, every trouble softened by distance. He dreams as if he has wings, and Lyra, though resting, lifts her head slightly, eyes half-lidded, as if she feels the same pull, the same breath of sky pressing gently against her thoughts. They are separate, and yet not. In the dream, Kedrick stands at the edge of a cliff, arms outstretched, wind howling past his ears, and Lyra circles overhead, calling once sharp and clear before diving. Not into danger, but into home. The kind of dive that feels like waking up inside your own bones. The kind of motion that has no fear, only purpose. And as she lands, the world slows, and Kedrick smiles not in triumph, but in understanding. Because the truth of flight, the truth of falconry, was never about control. It was always about letting go and trusting what comes back to you. In the tower, the wind shifts slightly, brushing a feather across the floor. The stars blink quietly above, and below, the valley breathes, unaware of the dreaming man and bird cradled in stone and silence. And so the night continues, holding them both in its patient hands, waiting gently for morning. And so the morning comes slowly, as it always does on the high hills where the clouds sleep low, and the air remains cold even through springlight first pale, and tentative, touching the eastern rim of the world and slipping carefully through the stone arches of the falconer's tower, where a golden edge begins to form across the straw-strewn floor. Kedrick stirs, not suddenly, But like a ripple across still water his breath deepens, his fingers flex, and his eyes open not as though waking from slumber, but as though returning from flight. He does not sit up right away. He lies still for a while. Listening, the wind whispers along the arches, cool and soft and low. Distant cry rises from the valley below, the sound of sheep calling to one another in early light. The world is waking, but here, at the top of the perch, time continues to drift in slower circles. Lyra remains on her perch, her eyes now open, fixed gently on Cedric with the calm intensity only a falcon can give, a gaze that sees not just surface, but something deeper, something older than names. Cedric breathes in, breathes out, and rises without a word. His motions are fluid, practiced, without wasted energy or thought. The kind of movements that have been repeated hundreds of times, not with boredom, but with reverence. He kneels beside a low wood-owned chest near the wall, opens it with a creak softened by time, and pulls out a bundle of leather, cloth, and a small bone-handled knife. He sets them on the table, then glances over his shoulder. Morning. Girl, he says, his voice rough with sleep, but kind. Lyra blinks slowly in response, then ruffles her feathers, stretching one. Wing outward to test the air. He slices thin strips of rabbit meat with deliberate care, lays them on a flat stone, and places it beside her perch, but steps back, no sudden movements, no closeness that isn't invited. She hops down with a gentle thump, lands by the food, and eats in silence. Tearing with that sharp, perfect beak, Cedric watches her for a moment, then turns toward the window and gazes out. The sky is wide this morning, filled with the pale blues of early spring and streaked with lines of soft white cloud. In the distance, the flock of starlings wail and dive in unison, their murmuration forming shapes that break apart and reform, as though the wind itself is writing in the air. He watches until they vanish behind the hills, then he sits slowly on a worn wooden stool and begins adjusting the leathers, the jesses, the anklet straps, the glove heel where once Lyra is. Ready, this ritual, simple and slow, is not about training or force, it's about preparation, intention. To fly a falcon is not to own it. It is to offer an open sky and trust that the bond, invisible and quiet, will be enough to bring her back. Cedric has flown many birds over the years, each with its own mood, its own language, kestrels with quick tempers and playful dives, goshawks with fierce loyalty and sudden swerves, merlins with their delicate, darting flights, but none like Lyra. She is not the largest, nor the most exotic, but she is the only one who ever looked at him the way she does now, without fear, without obedience, but with shared awareness. They are equals in the tower, both born to solitude, both at peace in the wind. When she finishes her meal, Lyra hops back to her perch and stares out at the sky. Cedric rises again, ties the straps gently to her legs, slides the hood over her eyes, soft suede, carefully stitched to avoid friction or pressure, and carries her to the window outside. The world stretches far and wide, the hills rolling beneath them, rivers glinting like spilled silver across the land. The village, a small blur of color, nestled near the tree line, smoke rising in. Tidy columns from a dozen homes. He lifts his arm, feels her weight settle into the crook of his glove, and waits. Not for a signal from her, but for a feeling in the air, that faint shift, that first ripple of the morning wind pushing up the side of the hill. It comes slowly, cool and even, and when it does, he reaches with his other hand and slides the hood free. Her head lifts at once, eyes sharp and wide, beak twitching, shoulders rising, wings, unfurling in a single stretch, and then she leaps off his glove into the open, her wings catching the air with that first unmistakable rhythm of power. She doesn't cry out this time, just glides upward, a smooth climb that draws a slow breath from Cedric as he watches her rise. She circles once, twice, then drifts toward the far ridge. Scanning the ground with that incredible precision falcons are born with, Cedric lowers his arm and watches, eyes squinting slightly, following every twist and dive. The sun is high now, casting warmth across the stone, and in the distance, clouds begin to gather near the peaks of the northern mountains. He knows the signs, knows the wind will change by afternoon, that they'll need to return early. But for now he lets her fly. Minutes pass, or maybe longer. He does not count. He simply waits, feels the world with his body, listens to the rise and fall of silence round him. Eventually, she returns swooping down in a tight spiral and landing with her. Practiced thud on the edge of the sill, she holds something in her talons, a mouse, caught in flight, and drops it near the perch before hopping to the edge of the table, feathers smooth and bright in the rising sun. Cedric smiles softly, nods, and prepares a new piece of meat as reward. Setting it near the edge without comment, Leo eats, slow and unbothered, and when she finishes, she hops back too, her perch puffing slightly as she settles. Cedric cleans the knife, wraps the levers, and sits back again. And they remain like this for some time, silent, content, side by side. As the hours pass, wind brushes the tower in longer waves, and clouds deepen over the western ridge. Cedric leans into the doorway, pulls his cloak tighter, and stares out at the horizon. He thinks of the falconers before him fallen, and the others whose names he's never known, those who stood in this same spot and watched the sky, not for omens or war, but for life, breath, return. He remembers stories Thorn told, about how falconry was once the pride of kings and queens, a noble dance of ritual and meaning, where every glove carried a lineage, every bird a name drawn from legend. And yet here, now, in this forgotten tower, none of that matters, only the wind matters, and the quiet promise it carries, that those who let go with trust may one day find what returns to them is even more sacred than what they held. He sighs, closes his eyes, and lets the sound of feathers rustling in the breeze draw him inward again. The afternoon fades, and evening slips in like a cat through a cracked door, quiet, unannounced, golden. The hills begin to glow with the last of the sun, and Cedric rises once more to cover the stone sill with a folded cloth, protecting it from the chill that will come. He checks Lyra's perch, brushes away old feathers, and speaks her name once not loud, but low, just enough to let her know the day is done. She chirps softly in response, hops slightly to one side, then tucks her head beneath her wing, and he returns to his cot, not with exhaustion, but with the comfort of a day well lived, of a silence well kept. And as night descends again, wrapping the world in indigo and frost, the falconer dreams once more not of himself, but of a single feather drifting down across a canyon, caught in a gust and lifted again toward stars, and Lyra dreams beside him, wings twitching, heart steady, the bond between them stretched not like a tether, but like a thread of wind. Always moving, always true. Night deepens, and above the quiet castle, the moon lifts slowly into the sky round and full, casting a cool silver over every stone and leaf. Like a gentle spell that hushes even the wind, the tower, high above the darkened world, is quiet except for the soft breaths of two beings bound not by chain or word, but by understanding. Cedric lies still on his cot, face turned toward the archway where moonlight filters through, illuminating Lyra's perch in a faint gleam. The shadows ripple round them like slow-moving water, and the stars blink softly beyond, scattered like salt across an endless canvas of ink below. In the valley, the last of the hearth fires fade into orange smudges behind shutters, and the sheep sleep in huddled circles on the grassy slope, their breathing steady, their dreams simple and sweet. Cedric dreams too not of glory or riches, but of open fields and silent mornings of WI. Ings stretched against blue of the cold rush of mountain air against his face as he rides through a world that asks nothing of him but presence in his dream. He is neither old nor young, neither known nor forgotten, he simply is, a figure at peace with the rhythm of flight and the song of solitude, and as the night thickens, his dream deepens, shifting slowly like the tide, until he stands once more beside a cliff, barefoot, wind in his hair, with Lyra circling high above, calling to him not in words, but in a sound deeper than language. He lifts his hand, and the wind takes him not with violence, not with fear, but with grace, with the soft pull of trust. He flies not on wings, but within them, surrounded by feathers and sky, drifting through the air as if it were water, cool and vast and eternal. When he wakes, the sky is pale with the coming of dawn, the moon slipping away behind the western hills. And the world breathes in again. He doesn't move right away, just watches the soft blue edge of morning seep into the tower, filling each corner with the promise of a new day. Lyra is awake already, alert and still, her body aligned perfectly with the edge of the wind, as though sensing something beyond the horizon. Cedric rises slowly, stretching each limb with care. His joints popping quietly in the stillness, he moves through his morning without thought-feeding, checking equipment, brushing dust from leather straps, inspecting the bells that hang from the falcon's leg with tiny chimes. Each motion is a meditation, a small act of reverence for the life he's chosen. After breakfast, he writes in his journal of practice kept not for record, but for rhythm. He sketches Lyra's flight path from the day before, notes the curve of her turns, the dip of her dive, the flick of her tail just before landing. These are not diagrams for study, but soft impressions, like footprints left in wet earth, meant to be remembered and then let go. Today, the wind carries a slight edge, something sharper, colder. He notices it in the way the grass bends near the cliff, in the way Lyra holds her wings slightly closer to her body, in the hush that seems to drape over the valley like a woolen shawl. Storm weather, perhaps, or simply a change in season whispering its first hints. Either way, he adjusts their plan. Today, they will not fly far. Instead, they will remain close to the tower training in, the clearing just beyond the outer wall where wild flowers grow in crooked patches and old stones mark the forgotten paths of a long-abandoned garden. Cedric moves with ease down the worn stone steps, Lyra hooded and calm on his gloved arm, the two of them descending like a single being formed from earth and air outside. The wind curls through the grass, bringing with it the scent of rain and heather, of soul damp with memory. The field is quiet, untouched, a sacred circle where only nature and old stone live. Cedric unhoods Lyra, raises his arm, and waits. She lifts her head, tilts it once, then leaps wings unfolding with that familiar rush, talons scraping the air, her body slicing upward with a cry that cracks across the field like a single perfect note. She flies not far, just to the low wall and back, again and again, her turn sharp, her speed precise. Cedric uses a lure, a bundle of feathers and leather, tied to a cord, spinning it gently in wide arcs to guide her motion. They practice this dance for hours, not for show, not for competition, but for connection. With each return, She lands closer, lighter, until at last she touches down with no sound at all. As if she and the wind have made some quiet pact, he feeds her, praises her, not with noise but with presence, and they rest side by side beneath an ancient willow that leans toward the tower like a dreaming guardian. The clouds roll heavier now, grey and thick with rain, and Kadric watches them with a stillness born of decades. Storms do not worry him, they simply are part of the rhythm, part of the sky's mood. He wraps Lyra in her cloak, his soft cover to protect her wings, and carries her gently back up the stone steps to the tower before her. First drops fall. The rain begins with a hutch, a whisper against the stone, and grows slowly into a steady patter, a lullaby for old castles and those who keep them. Inside the tower, Kadric lights a single candle, its flame flickering against the stone, casting long, slow shadows that sway with the breath of the storm. He sits beside it, Lyra beside him, both quiet, both content to simply exist within the shelter of their world. He speaks softly now, not to teach or tell, but to remember, murmuring old tales told to him by Thorn, stories of falcons used by queens to deliver messages through war-torn skies, of ancient Persian falconers who trained birds with whispers and incense, of Norse hunters who tied bells carved from bone to the legs of white hawks that vanished into snow. These are not facts for books, but memories handed down through generations, woven into breath and repetition. Lyra listens not with comprehension perhaps, but with recognition. Her eyes half-lidded, her body calm. The candle burns lower, the rain continues, and the tower becomes a world of its own, a single circle of warmth and quiet high above a land gone to sleep beneath the storm. And in that warmth, as the day fades once more into evening, Kadric closes his eyes and lets himself drift not into sleep, not yet, but into something softer, into memory, into sky, into the feeling of feathers brushing his cheek and the hush of wings in his ear. And Lyra breathes beside him, steady and still, her chest rising with the wind. By morning, the storm has passed, leaving behind a world rinsed clean and hushed in that special kind of stillness that follows rain, where every leaf hangs heavy with drops, every stone glistens, and the air feels new again. The wind has softened, and low clouds drift lazily across the valley, casting shifting shadows that sweep over the hills like ghostly sails. In the tower, the first light filters through the arches with a tender silver glow, dappling the straw and dancing over the still form of the sleeping falconer. Kadric does not wake quickly to day his body remains in the quiet rhythm of rest, lulled by the lullaby of raindrops through the night and the deep comfort of knowing there is no urgency, no obligation pressing in on him. When he does stir, it is with a breath as deep as a mountain stream, slow and clear, his eyes opening to the faint mist that curls into the room like a welcome guest. Beside him, Lyra is already awake, preening slowly, her feathers catching the light with every small motion. And when she notices his eyes open, she chirps a sound so soft it's almost a breath, and Kadric smiles, the corners of his eyes crinkling with familiarity. He whispers, "Good girl," in that low voice she's heard since the first morning they shared together in this tower, and slowly rises to greet the day. The air smells of moss and wet stone, of distant smoke from the village chimneys, and of the subtle, unmistakable scent of feathers. Kadric walks barefoot across the room, feeling the cool smoothness so. If the stone beneath his feet, and opens the old wooden chest again, not for tools today, but for something older, something wrapped in linen and tied with a faded blue ribbon. It is a scroll, eased and frayed, the ink faded in places, written in a hand not his own. It was Thorn's, left to him on the day of his mentor's passing, a collection of thoughts, lessons, Memory's a journal of falconry and philosophy that Cadric rarely opens except on mornings like this. He sits by the window, cross-legged, the scroll in his lap, and unrolls it slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate parchment. His eyes drift over the words. Reading them silently to himself, a falconer must learn the sky before he learns the bird. For the sky is where she belongs, not in your glove, not in your room, not in your heart. If you forget that, she will never trust you. Cadric nods softly, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in again as if they are fresh. He thinks of the first time Lyra flew and did not return right away, how he had waited, heart thudding with uncertainty, not knowing if she was gone forever, and how she returned the next dawn, silent, calm, and with the air of one who had made her own decision. That was the day their bond truly began, not from capture or command, but from freedom. He rolls the scroll up again, ties it, and returns it to the chest, placing it gently as if tucking in an old friend. The day unfolds quietly, the mist clears by. Midday, and the sun breaks through, soft and golden, painting the tower in warmth that seeps into the stone like a sigh. Cadric spends the morning mending straps, sharpening the tiny blade he uses for preparing food, cleaning Lyra's hood with a damp cloth, each task done slowly, with care. Like prayer, in the afternoon, they fly not far, but enough to feel the wind again, enough to stretch muscles and wings, enough to remind both falcon and man that movement is part of life's song. Lyra's dive is especially sharp today. She arcs downward in a blur, catching the practice low with precision, then coasting back in a wide circle before returning to perch on Cadric. His glove with that familiar weight that now feels as much a part of him as breath. They return to the tower in the late afternoon, where he prepares a stew over small brazier carrots, turnip, barley, and a bit of wild herb from the garden slope, while Lyra preens by the window, watching the sky shift toward dusk. The light fades slowly, stretching golden fingers across the fields, casting long shadows from every tree and tower, until at last the sun slips behind the hills and the stars begin to gather. Cadric finishes his meal, feeds Lyra a final morsel, then settles beside the window to write again, not just of the day's flight, but of the stillness it brought. The clarity of her eyes when she locked onto the lore, the feeling of absolute trust when she landed again and looked at him as if to say, I chose this. He writes in a slow, looping hand, the words curling across the page like smoke from a chimney, not for anyone to read, but to mark the moment, to preserve the feeling outside. The wind has shifted again, gentler now, carrying the scent of the river, the hum of insects, and the faint music of distant chime from the village chapel tower. Cadric listens for a long time before standing, walking to Lyra, and lifting her gently into his hands. He checks her talons, strokes the smooth line of her wing, then places her on her perch. She watches him, unmoving, as he lights a candle, the flame flickering warm against the stone, casting a golden halo that wraps round the curve of her backhand, the length of his arm, and in that quiet glow, something ancient and tender lingers, an unspoken recognition that in this life, some bonds are not loud or flashy, but deep, rooted in repetition and respect. As the candle burns low and the stars thicken above them, Cadric lies back once more, tucking the wool blanket over his chest, his fingers resting lightly near Lyra's perch, and lets the night carry him. Dreams return not in sharp scenes, but in sensations, the whisper of feathers, the rush of wind, the moment of release, and the beauty of return, and high above the world, in a place where time moves slower and sleep comes softer. The falconer and his bird drift once again into the hush of night. where nothing matters but breath and sky, and the quiet promise that tomorrow they will rise again together. The morning after a clear night is always gentler on the soul, and in the falconer's tower the light rives not in haste, but in reverence, its fingers stretching softly across the flagstones creeping up the folds of a wool blanket, and gently warming the old cloak hung near the door. Cedric stirs before the sun crests fully, not because he must, but because his body, conditioned by decades of listening to wind and bird, knows the rhythm of daybreak more intimately than a bell or a sea. Locke ever could. His eyes open slowly, the haze of sleep still soft round his gaze, and he breathes in deeply, drawing into his lungs the scent of old stone, feathers, morning air, and the faintest memory of smoke from yesterday's fire. Beside him, Lyra is already awake, her yellow-ringed eyes sharp but calm, and her posture steady. Elegant even in stillness, she makes no sound, and neither does he at first. Instead, they simply share the space the same way two trees share soul, or two rivers eventually find each other downstream. And after a long moment, Cedric speaks in a whisper meant more for the wind than the walls. It feels like a good day for listening. He rises slowly, stretching his arms toward the stone arch overhead, joints popping like dry twigs, and lets the sunlight roll down his arms like warm honey. There's no rush, nothing to chase, nothing to win, only another day to exist well and to witness the sky. He prepares Lyra's morning, portioned with care, slicing the meat with clean, even strokes, and setting it near her perch without a word, stepping back as always to let her move at her own pace. She lands beside it with that soft, weightless grace unique to raptors and begins to eat. Methodical, purposeful, delicate and brutal in equal measure, nature at its most honest. While she eats, Cedric walks to the edge of the tower window and gazes out. Over the land below, a low mist sits in the valley, hugging the river in a long silver ribbon that snakes through the fields and far beyond the woods, where the trees begin to thicken into forest. In the distance, a deer move east slowly across the slope, unaware of the eyes above it, and bird song begins to echo faintly through the hill's thrushes, first then a pair of finches, in a musical call and response that rises with the sun. Today, Cedric decides, is not a day for practice or hunting, nor for anything expected or routine. Today is for wandering. He fastens Lyra's jesses and who gently tucks her into the falconer's satch. He uses for travel and packs a satchel of his own, a piece of bread wrapped in cloth small, bottle of spring water from the well, and an apple he pecked from the tree behind the old chapel the day before. They descend the tower steps slowly, the light from the archway growing brighter behind them as they move downward, and the air gradually warms as stone gives way to earth. Outside, the wind is cool but kind, brushing the grasses in long strokes and making the leaves tremble on the rowan trees. They walk along the path that leads away from the castle, not toward the village this time, but toward the old hills to the west, where ruins sleep and stories linger beneath moss and time. The trail is narrow, barely marked anymore, but Cedric knows every curve, every dip, every stone worn smooth by decades of quiet footsteps. Lyra stirs in the satchel now and then, shifting her weight slightly as if sensing the open space ahead, the promise of higher ground. And when they reach the crest of the hill just past midday, the entire world seems to open before them, valleys rolling away in every direction, clouds casting soft shadows over patchwork fields. And in the far distance, the shimmer of a lake like a mirror to the sky. They pause there, Cedric kneeling in the grass and hooking Lyra's hood and letting her eyes adjust to the brightness. She blinks once, twice, then stands tall on his glove, lifting her wings briefly to test the air. He raises his arm without speaking, and she launches wings slicing the sky inward. Slow walks, not for hunt, not for task, but for the sheer joy of motion. He watches her until she becomes no more than a dark speck, circling the sunlit clouds, and then he lies back in the grass, closes his eyes, and listens. The earth hums beneath him, a deep low rhythm of growing things and buried roots, and the wind above hums higher, a song of wings and movement, and between them he finds that rare and precious silence, the kind that is not empty, but full of all things unspoken. Time passes strangely there. It does not tick or count. It breathes. When Lyra returns, she lands beside him on the grass, not on his glove, as if to say, "We are equals now." Here, he smiles, sits up slowly, and shares a bit of bread with her, not because she needs it, but because it is his way of saying thank you. They sit together until the light begins to slant, the golden hour turning the hills into molten gold and the sky into a painter. Canvas of lavender and rose, and only then do they begin the walk back, slow now, as if each step is a farewell to a day that will never come again in quite the same shape. The tower greets them in shadow, but warmly the stones still warm from the sun. The air inside faintly scented with lavender from the sprigs Cadric keeps hung near the window. He prepares Lyra's place, brushes the day's dust from her feathers with a soft cloth, and hums an old song, a lullaby his mother once sang to him when he was barely more than a child wandering fields with a wooden sword and dreams too large for his small frame. And as the stars return, blinking patiently into place one by one, Cadric lights the candle by the window, sets his journal on the small table, and writes only one sentence tonight. Some days are meant not to be remembered, but to be lived until they echo forever. And as the flame flickers low and Lyra drifts into sleep, head tucked beneath one wing, Cadric lies back once more, hands folded on his chest, and breathes in the peace of a life lived close to the sky, close to the wind, and closest of all to the silent language between bird and man that says more in stillness than 1,000 voices ever could. The sky above the tower the next morning is a wide and endless pale blue, the kind that feels hand-washed by dawn herself, rinse-free of shadows, and stretched smooth like linen across the heavens. No clouds, no birds just yet, only that quiet high hush that comes when the world is still holding its breath before the chorus of the day begins. Inside the tower, light spills in gently across the smooth stone floor, warming the edges of the straw mat and curling over the round perch where Lyra dozes with one eye half open. Cadric, still bundled beneath his woolen blanket, blinks slowly awake as a breeze brushes across his cheek. Soft as a kiss from the past, he lies still for a moment longer, letting the warmth of the blanket balance with the coolness of the air, his senses stretching out like a cat before rising. There's no sound except the occasional creak of timber above and the faint rustle of feathers, yet the silence isn't empty, it's full, saturated with peace and the promise of a day not yet written. He rises, his joints clicking softly in the hutch, and smiles without even thinking. Because there is something in the air today, a stillness, yes, but also a kind of invitation, not to go far, not to conquer or explore, but to look inward, to tend the smaller things. He begins by lighting a small fire in the brazier, just enough to heat water for tea, and adds a sprig of dried mint from the little pouch near the window ledge. As it steeps, he turns to Lyra, who now stretches her wings slowly, luxuriously, like someone waking from a good dream. "Morning, love," he murmurs, voice thick with sleep and affection, and gently lifts her from the perch to inspect her talons, brush away a few flecks of dried grass, and check the small copper bell tied to her anklet. It rings just once, a tiny sound like a raindrop on glass, then falls silent, satisfied. He returns her to the perch, pours his tea into a carved wooden cup, and sits cross-legged by the window to sip in the sun. From here, the valley looks like a painting left unfinished, soft with dew and halflet, the edges blurred by distance and rising warmth. The village smoke curls upward like lazy inclines. And birds begin to stir, blackbirds first, then doves. Then the distant call of a rook from the western pines. Kedrick drinks slowly, each sip a meditation, and then opens his journal not to write, but to draw. He traces the arc of Lyra's wings, sketches the bend of a feather, the tilt of her head, and then draws a tiny oak leaf beside it, adding faint vining lines until the leaf looks almost real. These small rituals anchor him, keeping his mind calm, his thoughts gentle, his heart rooted in rhythm. After an hour or more, he sets the journal aside, pulls on his soft leather boots, and prepares a small satchel lonely water, some dried apple, and a piece of smoked fish wrapped in cloth. Today, they will not fly high today. They will walk together through the forest paths behind the tower, places few ever go now. Places that once held castles and shrines but now belong to moss and memory. He hoods Lyra gently, carries her on his glove, and begins down the narrow path that winds behind the tower, through the old stone arch once used by monks to reach the woods for herbs and prayer. The path is overgrown in places, with ferns brushing against his legs and brambles clinging to the edges. But he walks with care, and the forest receives him like an old friend. Shafts of sunlight pierce through the canopy in golden beams, lighting the dust that floats like glittering threads in the air, and the silence here is deeper layered with the quiet creak of trees. The distant drip of water over stone, the occasional flutter of wings above. Kedrick pauses, often not because he tires, but because there is so much to notice. A patch of mushrooms, growing in a perfect circle, a spider's web glistening between to bent branches, a tree with bark split open in the shape of a heart. Each moment is a still life, a lesson in patience and presence. Eventually, he reaches a clearing where the ruins of an old chapel stand, just a few crumbling stones, half swallowed by ivy, and an archway through which the sky now peers like a curious guest. This was where Thorn brought him, once, when he was still a boy with shaking hands and a heart to fast. Every falconer must have a place like this, Thorn had said, voice low and warm, a place with no roof, where you can hear your own thoughts and not run from them. Kedrick smiles at the memory, sets Lyra gently on the grass, and removes her hood. She blinks, then looks round, tilts her head, and takes off without prompt, soaring low across the clearing, looping once round the broken wall, then returning to perch on a fallen column. He does not move, does not call her back, just watches for long minutes. The two of them simply exist, him seated against the stones, her watching from the pedestal, the sunlight dappling between them like flickering gold leaf, and in that quiet space, time folds inward. He thinks not of days or years, but of cycles of seasons and migrations, of births and returns. He remembers things he thought forgotten. His first falcon, his scrappy kestrel with one damaged talon, the winter when the hawks wouldn't come near. The time he fell from the tower roof and broke to ribs because he insisted on watching the sky through a storm. And he remembers how, through it all, there was always a bird nearby, sometimes his, sometimes wild, but always watching, always teaching. As the sun climbs higher, the light shifts, and Lyra returns to him, not landing on his glove, but brushing past his shoulder as she glides to the ground beside him. He laughs quietly, gives her a bit of the fish from his satchel, and they sit together once more, watching ants crawl across the stone, listening to the leaves whisper things only trees can hear. When it's time to go, they take the long path back through the meadow with the wild daisies, past the stream that sings over smooth rocks, beneath the low branches that make tunnels of green, and as the tower comes into view once more, its silhouette against the afternoon sky familiar and warm, Cedric feels something settle in his chest. Not pride, not relief, just a sense of rightness, of being where he belongs. Back in the tower, he removes Lear's gear, strokes her feathers, and gives her a place to rest by the open window. Then he sits, writes again in the journal not about the walk or the chapel or the ruined arch, but about what it felt like to hear the forest breathing, and as the sun sinks low and the first stars begin to peek through the fading light, Cedric prepares a bit of soup, lights the candle by the hearth, and watches the flame dance. He says nothing, and neither does Lear, but their silence is not empty. It is shared, and as night rises once more, with its cool fingers and velvet hush, the falconer lies back, hands folded behind his head, the wind threading softly through the arches, and let sleep take him not as an escape, but as a continuation of the peace he carries with him. Always like feathers in the dark, the morning air carries the quiet scent of pine and stone, fresh and cool like river water poured over smooth hands, and as the light filters slowly into the falconer's tower it brings with it a hush, so complete that it feels more like presence than silence. Cedric lies on his cot, motionless for now, though awake his breath steady, slow, his eyes half open beneath, lashes that catch the gold of dawn. Outside, the sky is overcast, a veil of soft grey clouds drifting like linen across the sun, and though there is no threat of storm, there is a kind of stillness in the air, a pause between pages, a chapter not yet turned. Lear stands quietly on her perch, feathers sleek and smooth, her talons wrapped gently round the carved wooden arc where she has rested every night for seasons now. She watches Cedric, not in alertness, not with hunger, but with a quiet curiosity, as if she, too, knows today will be different and waits for him to name it. Cedric finally sits up, rubbing his eyes slowly, swinging his legs over the edge of the cot and letting his bare feet touch the chill of the stone floor. He doesn't shiver, he's used to this. Kind of cold, the gentle, honest kind that tells you you're alive. And in a place that asks nothing of you but awareness, the brazier is unlit today, and he makes no move to spark it. There's no need for a fire, not yet. Not with the air still light and unburdened. Instead, he walks to the chest, opens it slowly, and pulls out a soft cloth bundle tied with a strip of braided leather, his oldest satchel, though one he only uses when something inside him says it is time to carry memory instead of tools. He unrolls it on the table, revealing inside a few small items, an iron pendant shaped like a falcon's head, worn and pitted with age, a tiny hand-carved whistle that makes no sound to human ears, and a folded letter yellowed with time, the seal long broken, but the edges still bearing the mark of a hand he remembers well. Thorns. He doesn't open the letter. He doesn't need to. He knows every word by heart, can feel them like worn stones in his palm, always smooth, always there when needed. He sets the pendant round his neck, ties the whistle to his belt, and then carefully, with the care of someone honoring a shared language, lifts Lyra from her perch. She steps onto the glove without resistance, without hesitation, and he feels the shift of her weight, the gentle pulse of her talons through the thick leather, the warmth of her body close to his own. She's lighter than she used to be. He thinks not in body, but in spirit, more open, more settled, as if the long years have made her not softer, but steadier. Today, they want to go to the forest path or the chapel ruins or the meadow where the daisies bloom. Today, They will climb. Above the tower, above the trails carved by boots and hooves and time. There is a ridge or high place where the wind sings louder, where clouds sometimes pause and hang low like visitors unsure if they've arrived. It is not a path he walks often, but one that calls to him from time to time. When he needs to remember something older than himself, they begin the climb just after first light. The mist still hanging in the gullies, the grass damp and dark with dew. The trail is narrow, nearly lost in places, but Cedric walks it without error his feet. Knowing where the stone shifts and where the moss will give, Lyra rides quietly, hooded, her body swaying slightly with each step. And the only sound is the crunch of boots and the hush of wind pushing gently through tall grass. The climb takes most of the morning. And when they finally reach the crest, the view opens like a secret valley stretching into the horizon. Lakes shimmering below like pieces of glass laid out for polishing, and birds, so many birds circling far above, below, beside. Gulls, kites, crows, a distant heron moving slow as thought. Cedric removes Lyra's hood and holds her high, letting her see it all. She tilts her head once, then again, and then without pause. Launches wings beating with purpose, not speed, as if she wants to feel every angle of wind. Every lift and drop. He watches her become a shadow against the sky, and then a dot and then nothing at all, swallowed into cloud. He knows she'll return. She always does. But today, as he stands alone on the ridge, he thinks about what it means to let go, not once, but again and again, every time he raises his arm, every time she flies. It is an act of trust, and in that space, that moment of release, he finds a kind of peace that can't be written down, can't be held, only felt. He walks along the ridge while he waits, the wind tugging at his cloak, his eyes scanning the sky, his ears listening not for sound, but for presence. Then, after what might be an hour or more, he sees her high-cutting. Through a ray of sunlight like a needle through thread and descending with perfect control until she lands with a quiet thump on the glove. She holds nothing in the talons, this time no prize, no quarry, only a calm, clear look, as if to say, that was enough, and it was. Cedric nods, presses his forehead gently to hers. Just for a moment, and whispers, well flown. They sit together on a flat stone, eating their lunch in slow, companionable silence. Dried berries, a strip of smoked meat, a bit of hard bread dipped in oil from the small flask he carries on long walks. Lyra eats from his hand without fuss, her movements exact, unhurried. When the sun begins to tilt westward, they descend, slower now, more careful. The rocks slick in places, the earth softer from the night's rain. By the time they reach the base of the tower, the sky has shifted again, turned to that blue-gray shade that means evening is not far, that shadows will soon stretch and yawn and curl along the walls like contented cats. Cedric tends to Lyra, first wiping her talons, brushing her wings with a feather comb, checking her eyes for dryness, giving her a small strip of liver as reward. Then he lights the candle, just one, and sits beside the brazier to warm his hands. Outside, the wind begins to hum, not loud, but steady, and the tower breathes with it, stone expanding, beams creaking just enough to remind him that even stillness is made of movement. He opens his journal, writes a single line. To watch her fly is to feel the earth fall away beneath my feet without ever having to leave the ground. Then he sets the book aside, leans back, and lets the weight of the day settle gently into his bones. Lyra rests again on her perch, one foot tucked, her head turned toward the open sky. They do not speak, for they never need to, and when night comes, It brings no dreams, only sleep, deep and quiet, like the pause between wingbeats just before the world tilts into flight. The sky above the tower the next morning is a wide and endless pale blue, the kind that feels hand-washed by dawn herself, rinse-free of shadows. And stretched smooth like linen across the heavens, no clouds, no birds just yet, only that quiet high hush that comes when the world is still holding its breath before the chorus of the day begins inside. The tower, light spills in gently across the smooth stone floor, warming the edges of the straw mat and curling over the round perch where Lyra dozes with one eye half open. Kedrick, still bundled beneath his woolen blanket, blinks slowly awake as a breeze brushes. Across his cheek soft as a kiss from the past, he lies still for a moment longer, letting the warmth of the blanket balance with the coolness of the air, his senses stretching out like a cat before rising. There's no sound except the occasional creak of timber above and the faint rustle of feathers, yet the silence isn't empty, it's full. Saturated with peace and the promise of a day not yet written, he rises, his joints clicking softly in the hutch, and smiles without even thinking. Because there is something in the air today, a stillness, yes, but also a kind of invitation. Not to go far, not to conquer or explore, but to look inward, to tend the smaller things. He begins by lighting a small fire in the brazier, just enough to heat water for a tea, and adds a sprig of dried mint from the little pouch near the window ledge. As it steeps, he turns to Lyra, who now stretches her wings slowly, luxuriously, like someone waking from a good dream. Morning, love, he murmurs, voice thick with sleep and affection, and gently lifts her from the perch to inspect her talons, brush away a few flecks of dried grass, and check the small copper bell tied to her anklet. It rings just once, a tiny sound like a raindrop on glass, then falls silent. Satisfied, he returns her to the perch, pours his tea into a carved wooden cup, and sits cross-legged by the window to sip in the sun. From here, the valley looks like a painting left unfinished, soft with dew and half-lit, the edges blurred by distance and rising warmth. The village smoke curls upward like lazy inclines. And birds begin to stir, blackbirds first, then doves. Then the distant caw of a rook from the western pines. Kedrick drinks slowly, each sip a meditation, and then opens his journal not to write, but to draw. He traces the arc of Lyra's wings, sketches the bend of a feather, the tilt of her head, and then draws a tiny oak leaf beside it, adding faint vining lines until the leaf looks almost real. These small rituals anchor him, keeping his mind calm, his thoughts gentle, his heart rooted in rhythm. After an hour or more, he sets the journal aside, pulls on his soft leather boots, and prepares a small satchel only water, some dried apple, and a piece of smoked fish wrapped in cloth. Today, they will not fly high today. They will walk together through the forest paths behind the tower, places few ever go now. Places that once held castles and shrines but now belong to moss and memory. He hoods Lyra gently, carries her on his glove, and begins down the narrow path that winds behind the tower, through the old stone arch once used by monks to reach the woods for herbs and prayer. The path is overgrown in places, with ferns brushing against his legs and brambles clinging to the edges. But he walks with care, and the forest receives him like an old friend. Shafts of sunlight pierce through the canopy in golden beams, lighting the dust that floats like glittering threads in the air, and the silence here is deeper layered with the quiet creak of trees. The distant drip of water over stone, the occasional flutter of wings above. Kedrick pauses, often not because he tires, but because there is so much to notice. A patch of mushrooms, growing in a perfect circle, a spider's web glistening between to bent branches, a tree with bark split open in the shape of a heart. Each moment is a still life, a lesson in patience and presence, eventually. He reaches a clearing where the ruins of an old chapel stand just a few crumbling stones, half swallowed by ivy, and an archway through which the sky now peers like a curious guest. This was where Thorn brought him, once, when he was still a boy with shaking hands and a heart to fast. Every falconer must have a place like this, Thorn had said, voice low and warm, a place with no roof, where you can hear your own thoughts and not run from them. Kedrick smiles at the memory, sets Lyra gently on the grass, and removes her hood. She blinks, then looks round, tilts her head, and takes off without prompt soaring low across the clearing, looping once round the broken wall, then returning to perch on a fallen column. He does not move, does not call her back, just watches for long minutes. The two of them simply exist him seated against the stones, her watching from the pedestal, the sunlight dappling between them like flickering gold leaf, and in that quiet space, time folds inward. He thinks not of days or years, but of cycles of seasons and migrations, of births and returns. He remembers things he thought forgotten, his first falcon, his scrappy kestrel with one damaged talon, the winter when the hawks wouldn't come near, the time he fell from the tower roof and broke to ribs because he insisted on watching the sky through a storm. And he remembers how, through it all, there was always a bird nearby, sometimes his, sometimes wild, but always watching, always teaching. As the sun climbs higher, the light shifts and Lyra returns to him, not landing on his glove, but brushing past his shoulder as she glides to the ground beside him. He laughs quietly, gives her a bit of the fish from his satchel, and they sit together once more, watching ants crawl across the stone, listening to the leaves whisper things only trees can hear. When it's time to go, they take the long path back through the meadow with the wild daisies, past the stream that sings over smooth rocks, beneath the low branches that make tunnels of green, and as the tower comes into view once more, its silhouette against the afternoon sky familiar and warm, Kedrick feels something settle in his chest. Not pride, not relief, just a sense of rightness, of being where he belongs. Back in the tower, he removes Lyra's gear, strokes her feathers, and gives her a place to rest by the open window. Then he sits, writes again in the journal not about the walk or the chapel or the ruined arch, but about what it felt like to hear the forest breathing, and as the sun sinks low and the first stars begin to peek through the fading light, Kedrick prepares a bit of soup, lights the candle by the hearth, and watches the flame dance. He says nothing, and neither does Lyra, but their silence is not empty. It is shared, and as night rises once more, with its cool fingers and velvet hush, the falconer lies back, hands folded behind his head, the wind threading softly through the arches, and let sleep take him not as an escape, but as a continuation of the peace he carries with him, always like feathers in the dark. The days that follow pass not in haste, but in a rhythm so slow, so unspoken, that it feels as though time itself pauses near the falconer Estau, careful not to disturb the breath-like pace of life. Within its stone walls, mornings arrive gently, wrapped in soft grey mist or golden sun depending on the sky's mood, and each one begins with a silence that stretches wide between Kedrick and Lyra, not a silence of absence, but of recognition, of shared presence. He rises before the bird song some days, other times he waits until Lyra stirs, and the first light touches the edge of her feathers, and whether early or late the rhythm never feels wrong, only different, as though the tower responds to the weather of their spirits. Some days they fly high, low, through forest corridors or along ridgelines that drop into wide open valleys and other. Days they stay grounded, walking old stone pots overgrown with creeping thyme, wandering to forgotten clearings where once stood shrines or wells, now nothing more than moss-covered shapes and memory held in bark and root. And in these days, Cedric begins to feel something changing, not in Lyra, who is as steady as ever, nor in the tower or the land itself, Witham and Shift with their usual quiet wisdom, but within himself. It is not a sadness, nor is it joy, it is something older than both. A feeling like standing on the edge of a season and sensing the moment it begins to turn. He feels it in his knees when he kneels too, lace his boots, in his shoulders when he lifts the water pail, in the deeper way he breathes when he lies beneath. The stars at night, not weariness exactly, but gravity a soft pull inward, a reminder that even in the quietest lives, there is a current that moves us forward, and yet he does not resist it, does not name it, he simply listens, lets it guide his pace as one might follow the direction of the wind. One morning, after a night of light rain and a breeze that smells faintly of pine and smoke, Cedric decides to visit the stone circle beyond the southern Glenna place he hasn't gone in years, not because it is far, but because it has always felt like a place meant for endings or beginnings. He says nothing to Lyra as he prepares. He doesn't need to. She watches him with a stillness that says she already knows. They walk slowly, through the grass still damp with dew, following a path marked only by memory and the faint rise and fall of the land. The circle sits on a small hill, ringed by hawthorn trees and surrounded by tall grasses that sway in waves when the wind passes through. The stones themselves are worn smooth, each one bearing faint carvings no one has translated, not because they are too complex, but because they were never meant to be read, only felt. Cedric stands in the center for a long while, letting the wind move round him, letting Lyra circle once overhead before landing silently on the tallest of the stones. And there, in that space where sound has no need to speak, he feels the pull again, not like gravity now, but like breath preparing to exhale, and with it comes memory, not as images, but as sensations, the warmth of Thorn's hand guiding his on his first hooding, the sting of wind on his face the first time a falcon didn't return, the slow, solid comfort of Lyra's talons as she landed on his glove for the 100th time, as if to say, I choose this again, and again, and then, something quieter, still annoying, not sharp or sudden, but slow and soft, like ink spreading through parchment, that this, perhaps, is the season for passing something on, not giving up, not stepping away, but making space. He leaves nothing behind at the circle, no tokens, no words, but as they walk back toward the tower, he stops by the old stone well near the edge of the garden and places one feather. One of Lyra's primaries moulted and kept for many months in a box of soft cloth upon the rim. A small gesture, a quiet offering, that evening, as the tower fills with gold and then violet and then blue. Cedric prepares to servings of food not for guests, but as practice, as habit beginning to shift. He eats his slowly, savoring each bite, while Lyra preens nearby, content, and after the meal. Instead of writing, he sings softly, under his breath, a song from childhood, one his mother used to hum while stitching or gathering herbs. It has no chorus, only verses that repeat like waves, and as he sings, he does not try to remember the words, he lets them come as they will, changing if they must. The Tau listens. And so does Lyra, and for the first time in many nights, Cedric does not dream of flying, but of planting, of hands in soil, of seeds placed not for harvest but for shade. The next morning, he wakes before the sun and prepares the Tau not to leave it, But to welcome something new, he sweeps the floor, pulls the hinges on the old chest, sharpens the backup glove buckles, even stitches a tear in the curtain by the west arch. Lyra watches without question, her feathers ruffled slightly by the breeze, and when he finally speaks, it is as much to himself as to her. It is time someone else learns how to listen. Over the days that follow, Cedric travels down to the village more often, visiting quietly with people he hasn't spoken to in years, old friends, children now grown, and especially those with a quiet way about them. He asks no one directly, but he watches, and eventually he finds her, a girl no older than 15, quiet but sharp-eyed, who spends her afternoons in the field staring at the sky with a look he remembers wearing himself. Her name is Ella, and when he first approaches, she says nothing, just watches him the way one watches a storm approach, curious, cautious, respectful. He does not explain himself fully, at first only invites her to visit the tower, to see Lyra, to watch, and she does, day after day, at first saying very little, then slowly asking more, about the feathers, the tools, the way Cedric moves his hand before unhooding, the way Lyra always looks west before leaping into the sky, and Cedric answers every question with care not to impress, but to teach, and Lyra, to everyone's surprise, allows it. She lets the girl feed her, walk beside her, even touch her wings, not right away, but over time and with a calmness that Cedric recognizes not as submission, but as trust once more offered freely. And on the 7th morning, when Ella arrives before dawn and stands by the window with arms folded tight against the cold, Lyra hops from her perch and lands not on Cedric's glove, but on the ledge, near Ella's feet, not asking for food, not demanding flight, just being there. And in that moment, Cedric knows it is time. He does not speak of farewell, nor does he speak of legacy, only hands her the glove, slowly, gently, like passing a flame. She takes it without trembling, and together they turn toward the sky, where the wind waits, steady and open. Winter folds across the land like a woolen blanket pulled gently over sleeping fields, and in the tower where stone meets sky the rhythm of life does not freeze, it simply slows, deepens, hums lower, like a lullaby sung in candlelight. The air is crisper now, each breath painted with mist, and even the wind moves softer, tiptoeing between trees and along ledges, as if not to wake what dreams beneath the snow. Cedric wakes earlier, though. Say, daze not from restlessness, but from reverence. He opens his eyes just as the sun begins its slow climb, and before he rises, he listens to the creak of wood, the rustle of feathers, the low crackle of embers in the hearth, and beyond that, to the silence between sounds, the deep, velvety quiet that only winter brings, where everything seems to whisper, be still, stay warm. Remember, Ella rises too, her steps now confident, purposeful, yet never loud. She moves like one who has learned not only the dance, but the rhythm beneath the dance. In the mornings, she prepares the gear with care, warming the jesses by the fire, checking the stitching on the hoods, brushing ice crystals from the perch with the same patience Cedric once showed her. Lyra watches her without moving, eyes half-lidded, content in her seniority. Corin, younger and eager, stirs at the slightest shift of air, hungry for motion, for sky. But flights are fewer now, chosen only when the weather allows, and always brief, just enough to stretch wings, feel wind, remind the body of its strength without asking too much, and in between there is stillness. Firewood is stacked high, herbs hang dry and fragrant from the rafters, and stew simmers long and slow, filling the tower with warmth that speaks not only to Hunger but to memory. Cedric and Ella spend more time talking now, not as teacher and student, but as companions who understand that the passing of knowledge is not a lecture, but a sharing of light. About the queen who once kept 12 hawks, each named, for a month, and released one on every new moon to whisper secrets into the wind. Ella listens, always wide-eyed, and sometimes asks questions that turn the tales into new stories entirely. One evening, as snow thickens outside and the world vanishes into a quiet hutch, she leans forward and asks, "Do you ever miss flying yourself?" Cedric smiles, not surprised, not pained, only thoughtful. He stirs the fire with the iron rod and answers, "Every day, but some days I forget that I never truly did." And she understands that flight was never just about wings, but about witnessing, presence, alignment with the sky's breath, and so their winter deepens not in coldness, but in closeness. The tower feels fuller now, not crowded, but alive, a home not just for training, but for becoming on the coldest nights, when the wind howls against the shutters and frost etches lace on the glass. They read aloud by firelight told texts from the leather-bound shelf, journals from falconers long gone, even scrolls of forgotten proverbs. Sometimes Ella writes, her handwriting neat and slanted, recording her own thoughts, her own questions, her own sketches of Lyr and Corin in quiet repose. Cedric reads them when she lets him. And each time, he feels both older and lighter, as if something heavy he's carried for years is slowly, word by word, finding rest. And when the first thaw arrives, not sudden, but soft, like warm breath on icy hands, it carries with it a clarity that sings through the valley. Water drips from the eaves, the air smells of wet bark and turning soil, and birds begin their return, not the trained ones, but the wild, the wanderers there. Heralds of green things, Cedric and Ella step outside on the morning of the thaw, hands bare, cloaks loose, eyes squinting into light that feels like forgiveness. Lyra stretches her wings more fully now, testing them against the breeze with a slow flap that scatters snow from the railing like sugar. From a sifter, Corin launches quickly, spinning upward in a tight spiral, eager and impatient, and Ella whistles low, guiding him back into a glide that's not about power, but about grace. Cedric does not join this time. He watches from the stone bench beside the tower, wrapped in a wool shawl, his steaming mug of pine tea warming his palms, and as they fly, as Ella calls and Corin answers, as Lyra watches and then joins, not to hunt, but to accompany, he feels something deep within his chest unfurl, not like a flower blooming, but like a page turning. That night after supper, after the tower is lit only by candle, and the embers whisper in orange and ash, Cedric takes down the old cedar box from the high shelf. Inside are things few have seen, a silver feather pin once given to him by the king as falconer when he passed his final test, a ring etched with an ancient rune meaning watcher, and a parchment sealed with wax, and touched for decades. He hands it all to Ella without a word. She holds it gently, unsure, until he finally says, "These were given to me when I was chosen to carry this life forward, and now they belong to you not as burden, but as compass." She says nothing at first, her fingers tracing the shape of the rune, her eyes flickering in the candlelight. Then she lifts her gaze and whispers, "I won't let the wind forget." And Cedric, heart full, voice steady, replies, "It never does. It only waits to be remembered." And in that moment, as the tower breathes round them, as Lyra shifts in sleep and Corin prints softly in the dark, something ancient is fulfilled, not ended, not closed, but passed like flame from one torch to the next. The dream continues. not as Cadrix alone, but as the skies, as the falcons, as the winds. And as spring rises, melting the last of the snow and waking the world anew, the tower stands taller somehow, not in stone, but in spirit, and from its peak, wings stretch once more, ready